everyone. My name is Dr. Dawn Hyman. I'm an audiologist, and I will be interviewing today Dr. Brad Stewart, who also is an audiologist, and he's going to discuss with us about his way of going about the consultation process. He has built a program called OddFlow, and he also has a new program that he's going to hopefully tell us about that is called Consultation First. So welcome, Brad. Do you mind starting out with giving us a little bit of information about you and where you grew up, what your family dynamics were like, and how you even got into this part of audiology?
Sure. Yeah, I'm in Texas, so grew up in this area, went to the University of North Texas for my doctorate degree, did my externship in Hawaii just because Hawaii sounded like a fun place to do an externship. I can see that you're surprised by that. That's new information. Hawaii was awesome. Great externship. I started my private practice career. Out of school, went straight into private practice, worked at an audiology practice. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about that position was we learned a lot about business. We learned a lot about consultative selling. And so for me, I grew up, my dad was a professional salesperson his entire life. I started a lawn mowing business where I was going door to door selling my lawn mowing services. So being able to communicate with people and move people to action has always been something that's just kind of been like something I've been good at and something I've enjoyed doing. And I've had to I've had to unlearn a lot of bad habits that I learned, like doing debate in high school that didn't translate well into patient consultation. But it's always been a topic that's interesting to me. And as I got into private practice on my own, it was something that was really kind of core to what I enjoyed working on and systems that I enjoyed improving inside of my own practice.
Excellent. You're unique in that aspect of thank you for sharing with us about how, you grew up in a household where someone was in sales, and then you already started being an entrepreneur in school with the lawnmowers, and then to have a really good foundation by working with Audiology Group of learning, the best way to help convert someone who is struggling with a problem and you need to just help them,
Totally.
So what was happening in your practice that you started to see as like positive results, positive outcomes that made you think, you know what, I think I'm going to duplicate this system. I think I'm going to help others in my profession with this.
Yeah, for a long time in my practice, my first audiologist that I hired actually had started her career at the same job at the same practice as me. And so we had the same training, and I kind of just brought her along with me to my practice when I started. And so I didn't really have to train her because we both had the same background. And then when I hired my first audiologist that I didn't have that context with, one of my biggest struggles was training her to create that same experience and generate the same results that my audiologist and I were. And it became very clear to me that being able to sell isn't an innate characteristic that everyone has. In fact, it's pretty uncommon for audiologists who tend to be in this profession because we want to help people. Audiologists tend to be kind of averse to even the idea of saying the word sales as it relates to what we do in our day-to-day work. So over time, it just became clear to me that I needed a system that I could replicate around sales. It was like replacing myself inside of my practice was always priority for me. I've always been very focused on the business side of my practice. And so to train new providers, I needed to have a system around consultations. And I tried a lot of kind of hacky ways to do it. I mean, I had PowerPoint presentations, I had, PDF slides and stuff. But eventually I met a guy named Chris Erickson, who was a web guy and knew how to do a lot of the technical stuff that I didn't. And him and myself and his wife started a company called OddFlow, where we actually built a consultation tool that clinics could use inside of their own practices. Selfishly, I was really building it for my extern at the time to use so that she could start seeing patients and I wouldn't have to see as many. And it worked really well and people really enjoyed it. And we found that there's more than one way to skin a cat. Like there's not one way to go through the consultation process, but there are best practices that make it more effective.
I would agree with that. I think a lot of tools came out of a need, and then it's like, well, I would love to share this with the world. And you're right. Most audiologists that I know, including myself, don't like the S word, sales. And you sometimes need help with that. Now, let's play devil's advocate. What would you say to a clinician that says, I don't need to teach someone how to sell? I'm sure every audiologist already knows what to do. We don't need to have a set uniform way of going about doing things.
I mean, I would just push back because I see so many people's numbers in the work that I do, and I see their key performance indicators, and I see the wild variability from provider to provider in performance. And, I see that a lot of private practice owners don't track their numbers, which is kind of a fundamental problem, because if you don't know how your practice is performing, and then you say we don't need a system or training, then you're just kind of guessing, and odds are you're wrong, because most audiologists are good communicators. A lot of us tend to be almost where we over communicate and we don't pull enough out of our patients. And so, like, I do think that most audiologists have the innate stuff that you need to be good at moving patients to treatment. It's just like organizing it in a structured way that psychologically creates a circumstance where the patient trusts you enough to exchange their energy, their money, for your energy, your solution, right? And that's ultimately what we're doing, is we're creating enough trust for somebody to take a leap and say, this is a lot of money. I don't really know that we can create the result, but you've given me enough confidence that you can, that I'm willing to invest in you. And that's ultimately what sales is. And that takes, it's something that takes nuance, and it takes, I think, systems to do consistently.
I would agree with that. I think repeating the same thing over and over again and trying to get a different outcome is considered insanity. But what if you actually aren't repeating the same thing every time and aren't aware of the fact that some of your patients are more successful than others in believing in your treatment options, and you're not aware because, well, I just kind of say this and they say that, and we hope by the end of the month it all turns out. Yeah. So when it comes to working with, let's say, onboarding a practice, you've been there, you've used these systems, and you have it available for them. How much is this able to be implemented in a timely manner? Like, what does this look like if you're onboarding? Let's say, I'm just assuming here, is it mostly purchased by a practice that's trying to help a new provider? Or are there established providers that are using this? So help me to see this process of how someone might implement this.
So I think a couple of things. I think that the problem that I see a lot is that practice owners have some ego around their ability to convert patients into treatment. We like to believe, I've been doing this for a long time, I'm getting consistent results, and it's just my team that's not doing as well as me, which might be true, in which case that means that you have stuff that you're doing that's working that you're not passing on to your team. But in a lot of cases, it's just not true. And the practice owner doesn't have enough awareness of their own performance and don't have the humility to say, I need help. And so frankly, I think that every single private practice that treating hearing loss with hearing aids is a significant portion of what you're doing day to day to generate patients and revenue in your practice. I think that every single practice should have systems around that consultation process, whether it's OddFlow, whether it's my patient first training program that I'm building with Tom Goyne, whatever it is, you should have systems. And really at the core, I think, Dr. Tom Goyne and I are building a program called Patient First, which is just a training program. But really our goal, what we're trying to do, is create a culture of creating sales systems inside of practices. And what that looks like is really just role play. It's just practicing consistently inside of the audiology practice with your other providers. I think that people don't do role play because it's intimidating, it's scary, it's embarrassing. You don't want your peers to see that you don't really know how to respond to things. But my pushback is always, would you rather your peers see that you don't know how to respond to things, or your prospective patients see that you don't know how to respond to things? I would much rather get in my reps in a safe environment where I'm not impacting a patient's ability to improve their quality of life, and then bring my A game whenever I've done my preparation to the patient. Because ultimately, this is all about patient experience, and it's really not about making a lot of money. Like, I think that that's where we get turned off, is that we think we're trying to manipulate people into buying something that they don't want, when in reality, all we're doing is we have people that are coming to us that have a problem, and they're hoping that we have a solution, and we need to be able to do a really effective job at bringing them out of their ambivalence and into a point where they're committed to taking action, and then setting up a container inside that consultation room where there's enough trust in me as the provider to be the guide towards that solution. Like, that's all we're doing. That's all sales is. So it's just a structure to help patients move forward to treatment. Long answer to a short question, but yeah.
No, it's a great answer. But so let's dig in a little deeper. Okay, so at face value, we know that you know what you're talking about. And to play devil's advocate some more, from an audiologist perspective, I might say, I went to graduate school for how long? I've been practicing for how many years? Can you help us understand? Now, I know you grew up in a family where sales was prominent, but what resources, or like what books have you read that really helped you to solidify that you're on the right track, or helped you to even navigate the systems that you're using in this? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I think this people can look into references and go, okay, I get it now.
So what I will say is that one of the most valuable resources is actually, there's a book that's a textbook about motivational interviewing, and motivational interviewing is a framework that's used with professional counselors, with addiction counselors, with habit change coaches. And all it is it's an infrastructure to take people from a place of ambivalence, which means like, I know I should, but to a place where they take ownership of the problem and the solution. And ultimately, like, that's what we see in our clinic every day, is people that come in and they're like, I know that my wife is annoyed with me, but I really don't think I'm old enough to wear hearing aids yet. Right? That's ambivalence. And so in our habit is the writing reflex. Our habit is to say, well, so it sounds like you know that there's a hearing problem, so why don't you want to take action? Right? And you're kind of putting them on the defensive right away. What motivational interviewing says is, it's like, let's pull them towards the solution. And let's say, it really sounds like the fact that you're here today tells me that you're willing to take some important steps towards addressing this issue. Tell me more about what's going on with your wife. It's pulling, right? When you're asking questions, you're pulling somebody to you. When you're telling them what to do, you're pushing them away. And that right there is like an incredibly important nuance. And most of us are guilty of the writing reflex and of correcting people and telling them what they should be doing. And that's just one example of motivational interviewing and how that framework is so helpful in patient counseling.
I love that. So actually, this is all about psychology, not so much sales, is it?
100%. Yeah, that is all it ultimately is.
So I think we could all agree that we would be more likely, those of us that don't like the S word, selling, would be more into this whole concept of helping with counseling, helping to work through, unpack whatever is blocking them from doing what they know they need to do, let go of the excuses and follow through.
Yep.
That's not sales, that's helping someone to have a better life. Right?
Semantics, but yes, correct.
It's semantics,
yeah.
but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
It's this, well, and there are books on the psychology of selling,
Right.
the psychology of marketing, the psychology. It's all about, but especially what we're working with is a broken system that no one wants to admit. They're afraid, they've been hiding it, they think they've been getting by pretty well. And personally, I think when it comes to the psychology of it, if 85% of the providers are women, and a large portion, even 50% of those who have a hearing disorder are men. Mm. I know if I'm super vulnerable about me being a woman, I probably don't want to admit it to a man. I'd rather admit it to a woman. So if most of the providers are already up against a pretty stressful situation where it's like, I don't want to listen to you because you don't understand me. If we can get to the psychology of this is not about selling. This is about helping them work through this situation. They suddenly arrived in France and they don't French. Like, who's going to help them? You can't just watch TV. You're going to need help. So I think that this is great that you're creating this structure. I'm really impressed to hear that it's based on something that is deeper than just selling.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, I think that you're right about the male female dynamic. And I also think that for myself, one of the things that I had to overcome early in my career is this tendency to take the more kind of male, like more alpha, aggressive, more pushy type of approach to sales. When I first got out of school, that was just kind of like my intuitive way that I went about selling. And some of the men that I know in our field are still kind of more on that side of things. And that, like the female, the more traditional, typical female energy of that softer, soft skills type of approach, the more human approach, the more emotion oriented approach actually is a huge asset, because ultimately with what we're doing, you have to be able to like have emotional conversations, and you have to be able to talk about emotion, and you have to be able to like guide people without pushing people. And I think that if you can take that care, that nurturing energy, and just put some systems around it, you'll find that you don't feel like you're selling, because you're not, because I think people think selling means pushing people into something they don't want.
Right.
And so you'll find that you're like having more success with people moving forward with treatment, because you're taking the honest, like sincere desire to help people, and you're just putting it inside of a system that helps guide people to treatment.
Yeah. And then on top of that, like there's been so many articles written about how the patient is in a different place now, even in the last 15 years, than they were in the past. When they talk to their doctor about a problem, it used to be the doctor's recommendations were like the word of God and you don't question it. Whereas now everything's changed, where in healthcare, we work as a team with our doctor. We might debate on things, we might get second opinions, but we want to be heard first and then get the best treatment for us. And now the doctors say, well, here's what I recommend. Here are your options. And the patient is in the driver's seat. Mm-hmm. Baby boomers are very aware of this. And if we can empower them with good information, but in the right structure, I do believe that this could help just make clinical situations easier, be able to predict how fast a patient's appointment would take if you follow along in the right structure. Is there anything in the program about that? Like, do you keep this way you can figure out what your hourly rate would be, because you just kind of go through the system and it prompts you more readily to be able to move on to the next point?
What do you mean about hourly rate? Okay,
so let's say you have a provider that tends to take 3 hours with a new consult, and you have a provider that can do it in 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to predict, you make an appointment and they should be able to get done in this amount of time. Now, if we don't know what's happening behind those closed doors, one person might be going off on tangents and they're not even like on point, where someone else is like, boom, boom, boom. They know exactly what to say in what order. I'm thinking a structured environment helps you to be able to predict how much your hourly worth is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, between having a structured presentation system like the OddFlow consultation tool, and then also having training that's consistent from provider to provider, where you're replicating the process every time with each provider that's in your clinic, then yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, your timing is going to be consistent. The patient experience is going to be consistent. You're not going to have, John that talks every patient's ear off and then Becky that barely engages with people. You're going to have a consistency across the entire team. So from the type of planning you're talking about to, just generally like getting good reviews and like the stuff that you need to build a practice successfully, like it's all, there's no downside that I can see to having
No, I
systems
think,
around this.
well, just going to fundamentally reading the e-myth and having systems and processes and knowing that no matter what provider someone sees, when they schedule an appointment, they will receive the same service. Now, obviously, everyone has their own ways of doing things, their personality comes out, but if they're touching on the same counseling points, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever the person who did the intake call says, here's what's going to happen in your appointment, we're almost guaranteed that that will happen. Now,
Yep.
okay, is OddFlow going away and the new programs coming in, or will they work together?
So for context, I developed Oddflow, which is it's a software. It's a
Okay.
web-based software that's just a presentation tool. So basically, it's on the desk between you and the patient, and you're basically guiding the patient through the consultation visually with just like a beautiful professional looking presentation. That's totally customizable to every practice. So all of the pricing, all of the questions that you might ask, like everything in there is customizable. I actually am an advisor now for Oddflow and no longer own that business. The Ericksons are Chris and Stephanie Erickson are running that business now. I created sales training that everybody that's inside of Oddflow gets access to automatically. If you don't use the sales tool, then this patient first program that I'm building with Tom is going to be a standalone sales training program that's going to be more of a long-term sales training where we're kind of embedding some habits into your practice to make you a practice that's more systems oriented around your consultative process.
Got it. Okay, so supplemental, we'll say. So
Yeah,
one is a training, the other is an actual
that's
implementation tool.
correct.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is there any takeaway that you really want people to know from this conversation? Anything that we didn't touch on even?
I mean, I think that there's a lot to learn about selling. And so there's so much opportunity, even for myself, who's been doing sales trainings now for a few years, to learn. I think that the key is, number one, you need to acknowledge that this is an important part of the patient experience. By acknowledging that and taking it off of your ego, taking it off of your fears and uncertainties and putting it on the patient experience, you're going to be more open and receptive to learning. And so that's ultimately the thing, is I think that just more of us as audiologists need to be open to this being part of our professional development. It's not a negative thing. It's not a selfish thing. It's not a money hungry thing. It is a patient experience. It is a core component of our patient experience and the way our patients perceive the relationship that they have with you as their audiologist. So I think that it's just really important that we get over our fears and get over our preconceptions and just be open to learning about this as a clinical skill, because that's ultimately what it is.
I love that. And that's possibly a clinical skill that we were never, or sometimes we've been doing something and we don't understand why we do it a certain way. And then when it's spelled out, you go, oh, that makes so much sense. And then you'll keep doing that good stuff more. Even better for, scaling a practice, adding more, even just a student, empowering them with the correct information and structure can be very helpful, because otherwise we're just wandering in fields and trying to pick up stuff as we go, and If something's not structured, it's going to take a long time to get to positive, good, repeatable level. So I
You and
thank
I
you
are,
for doing
yeah,
that.
totally. I mean, we're both practice owners and we both have conversations with practice owners. And one of the most common refrains is that we didn't learn how to do this in school. And I'm super excited because the University of North Texas is actually bringing me on to teach the private practice course. But even before that, they signed on as our first university partner with the OddFlow consultation tools so that they could teach their students how to do this skill in their clinic at the university, which I think if we can start to see more of this earlier in our education as a profession, I think that it would really, we would see a lot more private practices. We'd see a lot more best practices in the industry. I think it's just such an important thing that we kind of fail our graduate students with.
I would agree with that. Having a great foundation is the way to go. Start there and you can just grow.
Totally.
It's hard to undo what you've been doing, start over again, but start with the ego to admit you're probably not doing it correctly, failing a lot, and then moving through. So I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate you explaining this to me and our audience. If you have any questions, please reach out to Dr. Brad Stewart. We are going to have his information down below. If you wanted to look into his current program that he designed, but also that the Ericksons are now enabling OddFlow, you can do that. And then also be on the lookout for his new program that is with Dr. Tom Goyne, another audiologist, that is called Consultation First.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.